This week on HTO Football, we spoke to acclaimed film director and producer Michael Zimbalist. His notable sports work include ESPN's 30 for 30 series, The Two Escobars, Pele, and Nossa Chape. Enjoy this absolute cracker.
Well, welcome to HTO Football. Michael, thanks for joining us. How have things been lately of the working landscape? What's it been looking like in the last few months, considering?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been very interesting in this brave new world we're living in. As you know, the football landscape has changed, the whole sports landscape, and then of course the film and television landscape has been shifting as well. And it's funny, I keep having conversations with colleagues, particularly colleagues, that are in positions that I would expect would have a handle on sort of where things are going and what the future holds. And there's just a lot of uncertainty. Certain parts of the industry obviously being hit much harder than others. I think anything that's heavily production based has just been really hard. And then even when you start to whittle down, what size of a crew are you going out to film with, and where are you filming, and what type of thing are you filming, and you start to get into the nitty gritty. Also of, are the people that you're filming with or that are filming on your crew, are they signing waivers and releases, and what are the implications legally? So it's a complex tapestry of questions that are being asked.
Sure.
And like you say, I think it's just so bizarre that no one's got any voice of reason at the moment, or rhyme or reason, and or you often look at voices like they'll know what's headed in the next few months. Everyone's like, there's shrugs everywhere. We'll see, right. We'll see. There's a lot of we'll sees.
I mean, trying to predict the production landscape feels a little bit like trying to predict the markets on Wall Street. Everybody's just kind of basing it on temperatures and what
finger in the air stuff.
Will be in certain groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we sort of delve into sort of some of your pieces of work that you've done, it'd be really just great to get a little bit of background of you and your brother, and so some of those early inspirations, particularly with that lens of sport. I mean, was sport a big thing in your lives growing up? There was obviously the Soccer World Cup in '94 in the US, and if that played a role, but just in general.
Yeah, my brother and I were born and raised in Western Massachusetts, here in the US, and we were athletes growing up. Never, I don't think, with aspirations of being professionals, except maybe when we were very young. And then, of course, we thought we would play for the Yankees. But our parents are both New Yorkers, so we had the interesting situation of being in, New England, Red Sox, Boston kind of territory when it came to teams, the Patriots, the Red Sox, Celtics, and so on. But we were of the New York lineage, and so we were rooting for the rivals, which is something that people around the world, I think, can relate to when suddenly they find themselves living in a city that's the rival sports city. We played a little bit of football, soccer, as it were, here. I think our primary sport was probably baseball and skiing. But I think, our father is an economist who worked for many years in Latin American economics, and then there was a strike in Major League Baseball when we were quite young, and my brother asked my father quite innocently why he couldn't fix it or write a book about the situation going on in baseball, because he wanted to see the season start back up. And that prompted my father to write a book about the economics of baseball, and then shifted his career into the economics of sports. So we grew up with, a father in particular who was a sports fan, but moreover was sort of interested in the socioeconomic implications of sport. And of course had deep ties in Latin America. And so those things came together. And then our mother is a therapist and an artist. So you kind of put those all into a mixing pot. I think you get the work that we've done.
Yeah.
I suppose if we can hark back to, I guess it's a decade now. It's amazing how the Two Escobars obviously one of my favourite 30 for 30 documentaries. You were a young boy growing up at the time, 1994 World Cup in America. Obviously, Colombia went into that tournament as favourites. Pele famously quoted as saying Colombia were going to win the tournament after thrashing Argentina. They had huge pressure on them going into that tournament. You produced that, Michael, some sort of 15, 16 years after the World Cup. Did that amount of time allow you as producers to digest that and think of what angle do we want to go through with this?
Yeah, it's actually, I believe, 10 years to the month this month that the Two Escobars was released, because if I'm recalling, it was in the middle of the 2010 World Cup that they put it out. I think they played it actually after a Colombia game, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah,
strategically planned. And that's right, we filmed it in 2008, 2009, which had been some 15 years after the death of both Pablo Escobar and Andres Escobar, the footballer who, of course, scored the own goal during the 94 World Cup and was assassinated 10 days later upon his return to his home city of Medellin, Colombia. And those 15 years, I think, more than giving my brother and I as filmmakers the opportunity to digest the events around the 94 World Cup, had given the country of Colombia enough time to not just digest, but I think also to feel safe in speaking about, in particular, Pablo Escobar and the whole phenomenon back then known as narco football, which of course was this adulterous marriage between cocaine billionaires on the one hand and the football clubs that they loved on the other. That was a very taboo and dangerous subject to be speaking about, even in the years following Pablo Escobar's death. And certainly for Andres Escobar, who really rose to the heights of being a national idol, an icon that represented much more than, just a celebrated athlete for Colombia, but sort of became the poster boy. I shouldn't even say sort of, very much became the poster boy for this multi-million-dollar campaign forged by the then president of Colombia, Cesar Gaviria, to clean or improve the international image of Colombia. And Andres Escobar really was at the center of that campaign. And so he represented so much, and I think his death really shook the country, not just because of how beloved he was as a person, as a national spokesperson, but also because his death really represented sort of the straw that broke the camel's back of how much are we really going to tolerate not just football, but all of our institutions nationally being infiltrated by these illicit monies and forces.
I think what comes across so strongly in that documentary as well, Michael, is the intense support behind that Colombian nation, in that football side, that the expectation levels were so high, weren't they? I can remember a few of their key players were out at the time, and it was obviously some death threats involved, weren't there, during the group stages, I think, maybe. During that time, I'm assuming that your sort of library of archives got bigger and bigger and bigger to choose from, right? Was there's so much raw footage that you had a hold of?
Yeah. So the history of the Two Escobars is an interesting one as far as certainly my trajectory in filmmaking goes. First of all, it was the first feature film that I made, and my brother had done a feature film, feature documentary called Favela Rising, about a cultural movement in one of the favelas of Rio de Janeiro following a police massacre. And I was running a theater company in Mexico at the time, a stage theater company. And then we teamed up and started working together. And this was the first feature film that we embarked on together. And ESPN reached out because they were just starting this 30 for 30 series and said, hey, we'd love for you guys to bring us some pitches, some ideas of, stories that could be feature documentaries about the intersection of sports and society. And we pitched them 5 ideas, one of which was the Two Escobars. thinking that, of course, this was going to be last on their list. You've got a story that's dealing with Colombia, you know, a country in South America. It's going to be largely in Spanish and subtitled. It's about football, which certainly at that time and to some extent still is not exactly the favorite sport of Americans. And then dealing with some pretty heavy, dark, you know, drug cartel and you know, civil war elements that didn't exactly ring ESPN on them. And interestingly, and to their credit, you know, Dan Silver, Connor Shell, and the whole team at 30 for 30 at the time were very enthusiastic, said that one really seems quite interesting and really empowered us to not only tell the story, but to do it in an authentic way that wasn't going to, you know, push us to have it be all in English or, you know, or sort of take it lightly on the violence. The original idea of the film was just a question, which was what involvement, if any, did Pablo Escobar have in the murder of this football player, Andres Escobar? And quite honestly, I mean, my brother and I were in Colombia when we were approached by ESPN to come up with some pitches for their series. And we had remembered when Andres Escobar scored the own goal, and then, of course, the international news story 10 days later that he had been murdered. That's all we remembered. And we had talked to some of our friends in Colombia. Nick Sprague, a fellow American who spent a lot of time in Colombia, had been looking into this question himself. And, you know, the amount of knowledge of what the involvement was from Pablo Escobar and the drug cartels in general in the football world in Colombia was just very minimal at best. So really, the whole film was just this question: what did Pablo have to do with this murder, if anything at all? And through the investigative process over the next year and a half or so that we ended up working on it, you know, we uncovered a whole world that, you know, really this whole narco football phenomenon that then led into this whole question of, you know, the national identity of the Colombian people and their international image, so incredibly tied up with their national team going into the '94 World Cup. And then eventually comes full circle to answer the question of, well, what did Pablo have to do with this? But it was quite a long walk to get there.
Yeah, I mean, often when I watch programs about Escobar, obviously Narcos is a huge program that came out on Netflix, and you often there's this portrayal of him as some sort of Robin Hood character at times, but also the fact that he was obviously a ruthless killer. Was there a particular image that you, or was that just organic, the way that you wanted to show Pablo?
Yeah, at the time we went to go make the Two Escobars, there really weren't that many TV series or films that had been done about him. There were certainly books that had been written, but by and large, his portrayal was much more villainous than balanced, I would say. And one of the first things we did was rent an apartment in Medellin, Colombia. This was actually many months prior to even beginning filming, just sort of the whole preparatory process. Partially because, quite honestly, I'd fallen in love with the country and I wanted to be there anyway. And so being in Medellin was an opportune place to be. I, you know, got in touch with Pablo's sister and just started spending time with a number of people, particularly on the Pablo Escobar side of the story, in the lead up to filming, where we didn't have cameras. You know, we were just spending time getting to know them. And talking about our intentions. And I think, you know, what we tried to put forth was the most, you know, journalistically balanced version of what we were hearing, which included both of, you know, the benefactor, Robin Hood, and family man elements of Pablo Escobar, as well as the fact that he was responsible for more than 5,500 deaths during his civil war with Colombia, and did all kinds of atrocious things, not to mention, you know, peddling billions of dollars worth of cocaine. So it was yeah, this was our attempt, I think, to put forth what we were hearing.
You spoke there fondly about your affinity with the country, but South America in general has sort of littered your work, but also your life. And I wondered if you could just sort of elaborate a little bit on that affinity with the region, but because obviously then it filtered through into other sporting work such as Pele and obviously more recently Nossa, Chape, etc.
Yeah, we're not. My brother and I, my family doesn't have any Latin American heritage, but my father, as I mentioned, spent many years living and working in Latin America. So my brother and I kind of grew up with his war stories, as it were, of being in Chile during the 1973 coup d'etat. Just there was a whole adventurous world down there that I think my brother and I developed an early interest for. And then we spent summers growing up doing social service volunteer programs in rural communities throughout Latin America. And then, in my case, I had spent a number of summers in rural parts of Mexico and had really fallen in love with the country and the culture. And then I moved to Mexico after graduating college for about 4.5 years. So it's just been, then after Mexico, fell in love with Colombia. We lived in Brazil for a period. My brother had already lived in Brazil prior on Making Phil Rising. So yeah, I think it's been a part of our lives for a long time. I currently spend a lot of time in Colombia and was supposed to be there right now, in fact, but they shut down the international border, so I can't get in. They shut it down the day my flight was supposed to arrive to Colombia. So, which, they're going through a heck of a time in Colombia. They've got a quarantine like you wouldn't believe, where they're, in some cities, it's the men go out one day, the women go out another. It's got to be one person only per household, and you got to be going directly to central service and back, and that's the sort
of order that Pablo would have liked, right?
Control.
An interesting comparison, isn't it? I don't know that Pablo, when people talk about the order that Pablo Escobar kept, they were exactly referring to.
There's definitely some inverted commas there, isn't there, when they say order with Pablo?
Yeah, I don't know if public health was his.
No, quite. What about that connection, though, that the South American countries do have with football, soccer? Because you spoke earlier about your sports and growing up, and North America, but Europe as well, has just such a diverse range of sports that people get involved with. And yet these countries in Latin America, just football is so entrenched, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean, 100%. It's been awesome for me personally to get to experience the fervor and passion for football all around the world. I mean, Latin America for sure. I mean, we just did a series with Gatorade about their 5-a-side tournament called Cantera 5vs5 that had us filming alongside the Champions League. So we were in Spain and filming in Italy, and to me it's awesome. You don't really see that level of how do I say this? But you don't really see I would say in growing up and in America, you see much more of a hard line where the stadium wall starts and ends, right? Between society and the pitch. And I think in many other parts of the world, and particularly with football across the world, you see that line very much sort of, much less defined, and it's bleeds over. I mean, I've been doing a lot of reading and research into the hooligan groups around the world, and particularly look at a place like Argentina, and just the way that a Barra Brava in Argentina, equivalent of the hooligan groups in I say the equivalent of the hooligans, but of course it's a very different entity, and the way that they can affect national politics, presidential elections. So how do you think of that as sport, as a diversion, as entertainment, when it has that type of
completely
historic influence?
Yeah. And talking sort of influence, just a couple of other sort of films that we wanted to particularly get your thoughts on. One of which was obviously Pele, in terms of an influence. Arguably one of the greatest footballers that's ever lived. His rise in that 1958 World Cup. What was the idea and concept behind that? What made you want to get involved with that one?
Well, why would you not want to get involved? Really once in a lifetime opportunity, so to speak. I'm quoting the once in a lifetime film, but Pele and his manager and his team had sort of synthesized all his rights into one place for the first time. We're interested in doing a film, and Brian Grazer and Imagine Entertainment teamed up with them, and very early on, we threw our hat in the ring and said we'd love to be involved, and brought them, our take on how this story could be told. And our agents at WME at the time were instrumental in kind of getting it all put together in the right way. And then we wrote the script, and then went on to direct it, and of course got to film it in Brazil, and Pele was an executive producer and was very much present. Although to his credit, I mean, he was incredibly collaborative, and there was never any sort of influence from him or his camp saying we want the story to be told in this way or that way, or they were very supportive. So
pretty good story. He was pretty happy with the truth. He goes, as long as you got that hat trick in the semi and a couple of goals in the final, the fact I won the World Cup at sort of 17, 18 years old, I'm pretty much comfortable with the way you shoot it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and particularly because the vision for the film was really, his rise to stardom in his first World Cup. And yeah, there's not a lot to make him look very bad during that time.
No,
I mean, any controversy he's been involved in, I would think, is after that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the Brazil link followed with the Nossa Chape documentary, Michael. We spoke earlier about the time for reflection you had between the 94 World Cup and your 2010 production. With the Chapecoense one, I'm guessing it was obviously a lot more reactive and the emotion was still very raw. Was that a challenge?
Yeah, that was a completely different process. I mean, the plane crash had happened 2 weeks prior to us, getting involved.
That's
Fox
a turnaround, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly fast. Fox Sports had six employees that were on the plane that passed away. We were working with Fox on another football series, Phenoms, following young footballers in lead up to the last World Cup. And they said, hey, would you guys be interested in doing a piece on Chapecoense? And the original idea was really just to film down in Chapeco with the team and the community for 1 month, and then to turn around a special, as it were, for Fox for the 1 year anniversary of the crash. And at that point, I mean, the 1 month was, we didn't know. They didn't know if the club was going to open its doors again, if they were going to close permanently. We had no idea what was going to happen. But the idea was, let's film and see if they reopen. And if they do, maybe we'll film up to the lead up to their first match. And then that'll be it. But that all happened. They decided to reopen. We got to the first match, and there was so much going on. So many narrative storylines that were just beginning. It was so hard to fathom this being a complete narrative. And Fox Sports was very supportive in increasing the resources so that we can continue to film, increasing, really the ambition of the project from what was going to be a television special to becoming a feature film. And then we filmed for the better part of the year, in all the way through the second Recopa match, which of course it's the ghost in my house that just opened that door. the second Recopa match. Yeah, it's because of the air conditioning.
We're gonna call it there, Michael. Okay.
No, we get a bit spooked out. No, I'm joking.
Start seeing weird blurs on my screen. Yeah, that was, man, it was so emotional. And I mean, we were still trying to turn the actual edit around very fast. So we were in the edit, only months after the crash had happened. And so you're watching all this footage of people who are dead, just these vibrant young individuals who are just passed away. And I've never cried as much just working on an edit. It just was so incredibly emotional. And then in the filming process, it was a whole, new world of really trying to figure out what the right way to be present, to be respectful, and also to tell the whole story was. And that involved a lot of, with the main subjects we were filming with, they were going through so much emotionally that there was times where we just couldn't film with them for a period of days because they couldn't be around it. And then other times when they could, and sometimes when we would push, sometimes when they'd push us, and and there was so many politics and controversies, that it was one of these films, I have to say, that when it finally came into its final, edit and took on this life of its own, it carried with it a sense of accomplishment for everybody involved that was unlike other films that
what was the reaction like with the club and the people of the town? Because I imagine, you'll probably look at critics and stuff like that on all your films, but actually I bet the feedback from them was weighing on your mind when you.
It was so complicated. I mean, the film, I don't even know if to date the film has been publicly shown in any of Latin America, if just to be honest with you, because there was so many different layers to that question. One of them is sort of the subjects you work with, the people you're filming with, and them watching the film. And in that case, they were extremely positive, and it was really rewarding to watch the film and have them give us feedback and so forth. But then there's also 71 people who passed away in lawsuits, up the wazoo from this person, that person, these entities and companies. And so, that's more on the corporate side of distribution, trying to finagle that area. And I know it was very complicated.
I mean, what we'd love to try a little thing out with you, Michael, here. We've got our counter-attack challenge on HTO Football. This is like our little bit of fun.
Questions.
Quick fire questions for you. Shortest possible answers would be wonderful. So the first one up, favorite sports film, but it can't be a Zimbalist work.
Shit, I'm supposed to be fast, right?
We can edit out. We can edit the power
I was going to get you to check the video audio then.
Oh man, favorite sports film. Oh, you're gonna kill me for this one. Just watch Cheer. Thought it was phenomenal.
Okay, I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah,
you know what it is. It's a Netflix series on cheerleaders.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've seen that part. Yeah.
My wife watches, so yeah, I know it now, unfortunately, but it's good. It's pretty good. Biggest inspiration for your work?
My parents.
Favorite sports team?
The Yankees.
Okay, this is the obviously the big one. Who would win in a sports one-on-one? You or your brother? I'll give you maybe like on a soccer pitch or.
Well, it's an easy question, Tom, because he's not on the phone. So obviously, he can't defend himself.
We'll have to get Jeff back next week.
Yeah, exactly. Just tell him I said him.
Yeah.
If it works strategically to my advantage, he'll say, "Oh, he said me." I'll say him, and then I'll have two votes for me.
It's a wrap. Yeah.
Messi or Ronaldo?
As the GOAT?
Yeah.
I'll go Messi.
Yes.
Favorite Netflix show at the moment? Let's go other than Cheer.
Say again. Favorite Netflix show other than Cheer?
Yeah, because
Remastered.
nice.
Favorite American athlete of all time, and also right now as well. So you 2 picks.
Favorite American athlete of all time. I'm gonna give it a tie between Jim Brown and Muhammad Ali.
Nice.
Right now, my favorite athlete, Colin Kaepernick.
Nice. And very, very apt at the moment. Good pick.
I like all 3 of their involvement in society at large, and you know, sort of breaking down those walls that we were talking about, the stadium walls, and having us ask bigger questions about what
Absolutely.
our society is and what these sports are.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think it takes brave athletes to step outside. And I know some have been criticised previously for not doing so, as we saw in some of the feedback on Last Dance and whatnot. But last question up is your dream dinner guests, dead or alive. Sports related, but
maybe 3 picks, Michael.
Okay. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story of FC Start. FC Start in, I want to say Ukraine, in Kiev.
Norway?
There was a team, I want to say it was a Ukrainian team during World War II.
Okay.
That had to play a death match against the Germans that Hitler orchestrated. That were in that were effectively in concentration camps in the lead up to the match. I want to say it's FC Start was one of the clubs, and there's another one in Ukraine. Anyway, I don't remember all the details, but boy, would that be an interesting conversation.
that's a film you've got to make as well.
I mean, Victory, the film Victory was loosely based on that. And I think there was a remake in the works at Warner Brothers for some time that never got off the ground, but also based on this idea. So I got to pick 2 more, Andrew. Let's see. Well, Muhammad Ali, because I've been working on a series about him, and so that would be extremely interesting and helpful. And
who's going to bring the party?
Oh, well, Ali definitely brings the party.
Yeah.
Another athlete. You know who I think would be interesting to sit down with right now? I've been following a little bit of the story of the women's gymnastics teams, and Simone Biles is, you know, what does 1 more year mean for an athlete like that? And the discipline and mentality that's going into, you know, is she going to compete? And it's so fascinating how much the coronavirus situation is affecting, I mean, sports at large, but then you think about athletes that get 1 shot their whole life, and that 1 year on their body can mean so much. Yeah. So there you go. That's my mix. You've got the Ukrainian concentration camp football players who are being sentenced to death, Muhammad Ali and Simone Biles.
Yeah,
nice. I think that's a lot for Simone Biles, but you know, she's only like 22, 23. But I think that's an incredible dinner lineup there. That's pretty awesome going.
I hope.
I think you'd get a diverse chat anyway, wouldn't you? You know,
you might have a language barrier.
Yeah,
a little bit. What's next for you? Before we wrap, I mean, what are you up to at the moment? What can viewers look out for?
We are working right now on a project about the World Cup that I'm very excited about. That hasn't been announced yet, so I can't fully divulge what it's about. But looking at a lot of the societal elements surrounding the World Cup, and what I think is one of these stories that just blows your mind.
Awesome.
Cool.
Awesome.
Nice one.
Yeah. Well, it's been a fantastic to have you on, Michael. We really
thanks,
appreciate
Michael.
your time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, it's been fantastic. Yeah, it's been a really interesting chat. I think we're definitely taking those dinner guests and that Netflix show forward. I think that's winning so far. I think, they're beating some other guests we've had. Been a bit generic. Other people, this is good.
I'm gonna binge watch here tonight.
Yeah.
Great. Well, good luck, guys. Stay safe.
You. Thanks a
Take
lot.
care. You
Take
too.
care.
Take care. Appreciate it, Michael.
We hope you enjoyed that chat as much as we did. For all the latest in terms of guest announcements and pod releases, check out our usual social channels on Twitter, Facebook and YouTube at HTO Football. Also keep an eye out for our latest competitions and best of luck. Stay tuned.